Busy seasons come and go. Sometimes you know they're incoming, like an upcoming sports season or the birth of a new baby. Other times they pop up out of nowhere, like a medical emergency. In all situations, having some easy to finish meals in the freezer is a huge asset, and the way I'm planning to avoid eating out as we enter the game portion of our youth baseball season. Today, I would love for you to join me as I begin packing our freezer for the known and unknown busy seasons ahead. The first thing I did to get started on my big batch cooking day was went out to the freezer and shopped our supply. I'm pulling various ground meats, so we have lots of options to use as the day progresses. I have ground bison, ground venison, as well as ground beef. My plan is to cook them all up together so I can have a higher fat content than the bison or the venison would have on their own, while using up some of what was harvested back in the fall. Now, I used about 15 total pounds of just regular ground meats, not counting the sausages that we'll address a little bit later. And so instead of doing those in individual pans on the stove, I decided to get out one of my roaster ovens, which is amazing for big batch cooking. Now, I will tell you, the funny story about these roaster ovens is that people will buy them around the holiday season and then they decide they're so big they really don't want to store them. So you can find them all over Facebook Marketplace and at garage sales and that kind of thing at a really, really huge discount. If you do garden, these come in amazingly handy when it's time to process your tomatoes in the fall, but they're also great at other times of the year when you're doing things just like this. I keep 2 of these roaster ovens. One was given to me by somebody that knows that I do lots of canning and big batch cooking. And the second one that you're seeing here, I picked up at a garage sale for $15. So when I say you can find a deal, you definitely can. Scour the marketplace and keep your eyes out because you will be very surprised at what's available. Now, once the meat was added to the roaster, I added some water so that it could steam up inside and nothing would scorch on the bottom before moving it to the location where it would be cooking for the rest of the day. The next project that I have slated for the afternoon is to get some sausage ready to go. I find that when I have a good stock of proteins that are really easy, the options are almost limitless. So we are going to be using a pork sausage as well as a breakfast version of a deer sausage. This was our first time using this meat processor for our deer, and we were amazed at how good the breakfast sausage actually turned out. So in the future, we'll be getting a lot more of that. We use it in egg scrambles or even as an addition for a sausage gravy in the morning, and I'll be showing you another tip on how I make that one just a little bit easier in a moment. Now, perhaps you've already noticed, but one thing I did want to point out is that the meat that I am processing today is completely frozen, rock solid. I could have thawed it out, but I didn't want to take up all that space in my refrigerator, so I am cooking it straight from frozen. This will make it take slightly longer, but I'm putting them on low so I can accomplish my next task while they're processing anyway, so this is going to work out well for me. In the future, if you want to do this yourself, you can of course go ahead and thaw out that meat if you have space to properly do so, but for me, this is what's going to work best. With the addition of a little water into both of the pans, it will help to steam up that frozen meat and there won't be any issues with it processing down the road. And plus, like I mentioned, gives me a little time to work on the project you see here, which is to put some pizza crust together. Every Friday night at our house, we have pizza night and the kids absolutely love it. And while putting the crust together isn't exactly time consuming, the time that it takes to let it go through the first rise and then prepare the pizza does add a lot to my day when I'm usually trying to make sure that I know what town we're headed to, where the field is, and that my kids have everything they need for the game. So taking this off the list and getting it through the first rise is what we're going to do today. Now you're seeing me make my first batch. I put the amount of ingredients needed for 4 crusts in my mixer at a time, and I did 2 batches of this. So I'm putting 8 crusts in the freezer, which will get us through 4 weeks. I will go back and do one more round. I just didn't have time to do it on this particular batch, but that is something that I plan to do in the future. So I have all 6 weeks of our baseball season crust completely ready to go. I will make sure to link this crust below. It is a Detroit style crust, so it's crunchy and crispy and cheesy all the way to the edges. Absolutely fabulous. If you are interested in a sourdough crust, I have previous videos on that as well, so you can check that out. I've done both. I just really like this one right now, so that's what we're doing. At this point, I mix the dough, I let it get to a shaggy state, and then put the lid on it so it can rest for about 10 minutes to really hydrate all that flour before going ahead and kneading it completely. If you're interested in the recipe, I will make sure to link it down below, as well as some links to items that you're seeing me use to make my processing day go a little bit easier. The secret to success for a big batch cooking day is to make sure that you're working on mini projects in the nooks and crannies of the time when the others need to be resting. So while my dough is resting, I'm coming back to chop up my meat, make sure it's really getting broken apart well, and that the temperatures are exactly where I want them. Now, if you're visiting me for the first time, or if you're relatively new to my channel, I want to take just a second to introduce myself and tell you a little bit about my family. My name is Jill. My husband and I have been married for 13 years. We have 5 kids, ages 10 to 2. When we first got married, we lived a few hours away, and it wasn't long after we had our first son where we realized the importance of having our family close. We moved back to our hometown into a 115-year-old house and have taken a ton of time to fix it up to be exactly what we were looking for. In the process, we've added 4 more kids to our family, and we raised them close to cousins and grandparents, and we really love the life that we've set up here for ourselves. The 10-minute rest time is now complete, and it's time to get that dough back into its kneading stage. So I'm setting my mixer up to go ahead and make that happen. Now, this mixer actually is made to mimic a hand kneading motion, so I don't actually pull anything out and knead it myself. I just let this guy do the trick. I found that it really makes a really soft, fluffy dough, and you can see there the dough itself spins around and eventually kind of will form a ball. It's really cool to watch it. My kids usually love to watch it, but this is actually a very rare day in our house. My mom has taken all 5 of my kids and they are planning to sleep over at her house, which frees up me as well as my husband for a date night. And let me tell you, the last 3 times I think we've tried to do this, one of the kids has been sick or something has come up and it hasn't worked out. So we were really looking forward to this night. With the kneading complete, I went ahead and transferred over the dough into a slightly oiled bowl so that it didn't stick, so it could complete the first rise. Now, sometimes I will just leave it in the mixing bowl that you're seeing here if I'm just doing one batch. So this would be my weekly routine, and then I move that over into my dehydrator, which actually has a dough proof setting, and that allows me to make the crust slightly faster than if I just set it out in a warm location. But because I'm doing multiple batches, I move this over, put some plastic wrap on it, and went and set it on the stove so it could be around all of that heat to go ahead and start the first rise while I mixed up the second crust. While the dough was kneading, I went ahead and measured out everything I needed for the second crust, so throwing it together was really fast, and then I slid that into my dehydrator so they could both rise at approximately the same speed. After I completed the sausage task, I got those set aside so they could begin to cool. With the plan of keeping my dishes to the minimum, I went ahead and drained off the grease in that pan, and I'm reusing it to pull a portion of that ground meat out. I am going to put this in the freezer without any seasoning at all. This portion will be used for things like great recipe starters for soups, chilies, spaghetti sauce, or anything of the kind. On occasion, I'll even use it like a loose meat cheeseburger and put some cheese on top, melt it, and make some little sliders for the kids if they're craving a hamburger. I pulled out approximately 4 pounds of the 15 or so that I started with, and the remainder is going to turn out to be taco meat. We go through a lot of taco meat around here for everything from nacho toppings to a soup that we love to actually just tacos themselves. A few years ago, I purchased all of my spices and seasonings, so I would have had a store-bought taco blend to go with that. But today I keep all the basics on hand and grind my own garlic that I grew out back to make my own seasoning blends. That's another thing that in my mind I had worked up to be a lot bigger deal than it actually was. Of course, you had to buy those from the store. Why would you do anything else? And once I realized that a few basic ingredients were the bulk of all the blends that I used, everything from fajita to taco to chili seasoning, it really was much more simple to just store the ingredients that I would need and be able to customize anytime that I needed to mix something up. If this is something you're interested in, I do have another video that I'll link at the end that shows various seasoning blends that I make here in the kitchen. I want to take just a second and talk about something that I mentioned at the start of this video. Sometimes our busy seasons are planned, like my baseball season, and sometimes they're unplanned, like a medical emergency. This is something that our family knows all too well. One day, a few years ago, it was the first day of our homeschool year, and we started out with a traditional picture on the front porch. Before the day was over, I ended up in a helicopter life-flighted with one of our children for what would end up being a 28-day hospital stay, followed by months and months of overnight visits and a continual process toward recovery. Praise God that we have a healthy family with 5 happy kids running around our house. But what I didn't have at that time was anything of this sort set aside for the people who stepped in to fill in the gaps for us. That was our moms, my mother, his mother, as well as his sister, all took turns and stepped in to take care of all of our other kids for us while we focused on the one that needed us most. If I had a freezer full of meal preps, that would have been one less thing for them to have to worry about. So I just want to give you a tiny bit of encouragement, even if you don't have a season coming up like mine, to put aside a few things that if you were to be sick or your spouse were to be sick or you needed to move away for a short time, that somebody else could step in and fill in the gaps for you and take on a job such as feeding your family with the same ingredients and quality that you would want without having to go to all the extra steps when you're obviously in a time of turmoil in your family. This actually hit home for me again while I was in the process of putting these preps together. I got a call that I needed to come and pick up my kids because of a medical emergency at my mom's house. Thankfully, everyone is fine and they're back home, but that could have been a similar situation where if that had been us, we would have needed something like this ready to go for everyone to jump in. Jumping back to the food, lightening the load just a little, you saw me put the sausage in the bags. I did bag them up separately, of course. Make sure to label. I know it's easy to think we'll recognize it, but all of the meat starts to look really similar really fast. Also, label the date. That is something that you'll want to know if you find something in the back of the freezer or ever have in a year or so. You'll want to know when you put that in there to know if it's something that you really still want to eat. Now, this is the first batch of dough, and I'm going to pull it out here, just throwing it on my counter with a little oil to keep it from sticking and get it divided into my 4 portions. There was a day when I would have weighed the entire set, divided that by 4, and made sure every crust was the exact same size. But that is not today. There is just so much going on that my motivation was to get this done. So I eyeballed it, divided it in 4, and got them all wrapped up. Now, a little word of caution here. As I was doing this, the dough was, of course, continuing to rise. And when I was wrapping these, I wrapped them pretty tight. And before I got them in the freezer, I could hear them starting to pop a little bit. So they were still growing as I was in this process. If you're doing this at home, get them into the freezer as soon as possible. I just had quite a few things going on and left them sitting out on the counter, perhaps a bit too long. But once they get into the freezer, everything is rested and it will stop its actual proofing process. When you pull them back out to cook these crusts, what you want to do is set them in the refrigerator the night before or even a day before, and that will allow the crust to thaw. All you'll need to do is get it out on your pans and let it go through its second rise before you top it and bake it. So it really shortens the process. One other tip, I usually add some Italian seasoning or pizza flavoring to the crust itself, but this time I did not do that because sometimes one of my children likes to make monkey bread, which uses pizza crust as a base. When I leave it plain like this, we have that option. So really think about versatility when you're putting things in the freezer. You can always add seasonings or change things up a little bit when it's time to actually process your final product. One of the unavoidable tasks about a big batch cooking day is cleaning as you go. You can see my sink is starting to fill up, but the one thing I like to do is make sure to always keep the countertops clean. So that way I always have a clear work surface and feel like I'm doing a little bit to keep the kitchen in order as I go. This is a huge help at the end of the day when you're tired and you just want to be done. So using those little moments in between to keep everything tidy is a huge asset to you, even if it doesn't feel like it at the time. We have a couple things left to do, and I also have an added bonus tip that I'm getting ready to share that I stuck in the freezer the night before. So let's wrap this up and I'll show you exactly what that's about. Here is the ground meat that is unseasoned. We're putting it in both bags and I'm getting it laid out flat. One of the things that I found most important for me when I'm freezing meat is that I make sure everything is as flat as it can be. This makes it stack well in the freezer or stand, just depending on what your freezer space is like, and it keeps everything organized. The one downfall that I've had when doing this is if the bag isn't completely clean on the outside when it goes into the stack, sometimes the bags can freeze together. So you want to make sure that you have everything nice and tidy when you're doing that, which is a really big problem for me right now with my taco meat. It has quite a bit of juice in it, so I ended up taking every single bag and spraying it with my grease cutting cleaner because this one was extra greasy. And that allowed me to get all of the bags safely in the freezer and not have to worry about them sticking together. With everything cleaned up and ready to go, I headed out to my freezer so I could grab the tray that I love to put things on when it's in there. It's a large, really sturdy tray, so I can carry a lot of stuff. And as you can see here, it is full because the day before I froze up a bunch of raw milk that our neighbor had given us in trade for eggs. This allows me to freeze it in the amount of milk that we would need for something like a gravy. So we have the sausage that we've prepped in the bags you can see here, and now we have our milk that will be ready for us at any given time, and we won't have to worry about something going bad. Our family doesn't drink a lot of milk, but anytime we can get it in trade for eggs, we're definitely going to do it. So having these pre-portioned available milks ready to go is going to be a really great savings for us on time, as well as giving us the flexibility to have meals that we wouldn't necessarily always be prepared for. I'm going to get all of this back into the freezers. But if you're interested in more freezer preps, stay tuned because my next day is going to be tortillas, bagels, breads, biscuits, and more. So thank you for stopping by the Hometown Homestead, friends. I hope to see you back really soon.